Well, good morning. It's good to see everyone today, and it's great to see a lot of visitors among us. It may be that you're here visiting family. It may be that you are just kind of passing through town or maybe visiting around. Maybe part of your New Year's plan was to find a church, and we're glad that you have walked through our doors. Or perhaps you're maybe even a skeptic and you just came to check out what this crazy Christian thing is all about. Whatever reason you came through those doors, we're really glad that you're here. And whatever questions that you might have, tap on anyone's shoulder and we'd be happy to visit with you, get to know your story, and provide, I guess, whatever answers that we can. But all we do is follow this book. That's where our answers are. And we hope that we could lead you to something that's helpful. I want to start this morning with a thank you. About this time, 2 years ago, was when I felt like I really started here. It was really like 2.5 years ago, but that was right in the middle of COVID. We were still doing split services, and everyone that I did meet was wearing a mask, and so it was impossible to remember faces and names. And it wasn't until about this time when things, I guess, finally started to open up, and there were more people hanging out in each other's homes and things like that. And when I got here, there was something special and unique from the start, even in the midst of all that I was so thankful to be a part of. But I remember everyone kept saying over and over again, I remember this over and over again, people would say, oh man, I wish you were here before this happened. You couldn't imagine what it was like. You couldn't imagine what it was like. Over and over again, everybody would say that. And I absolutely believed it. And now I feel like we're at a point where I get to participate in that being true. And maybe some of you who've been here a while are like, no, it's not there yet. We're still getting there. We're just getting started. And I hope that's the case. I think it's the case. But I'm really glad to be a part of it. And so let me, I guess, get into the thanks part of it. It's one of those things where it's people say thank you and they're like, everybody says that, but I really mean it. It's really hard to convince people that you're thankful. I don't know. And so I thought maybe I could share a story or what was going on in my mind that might express in some way my gratitude to you all. I don't know how. I think it was when I was a camp friend at Camp Tennessee. I'm sorry, this might take up a second, but I want to mean it. So I was a camp friend at Camp Tennessee, and I heard about Lost River because some of the kids from here went to that camp. And while we were on the road, I just pulled up Lost River and started listening to sermons. And I had heard of Lawrence because I grew up at Southside, where he was a trainee a while ago. And so there were a lot of mutual connections, but then I started listening to these sermons. And I remember the very first series that I listened to was one that some of you may remember. It was called No Comparison. It's about our challenge of comparing ourselves with others. And anyway, the more sermons that I listened to, the more I was just absolutely blown away and found them to be so helpful and impactful. And I'm like, man, what an incredible church. If this is what they're being fed week by week by week, then what are these people like? They must be the most incredible people. And I can say with absolute sincerity that that is certainly true. To come here and to meet everybody and see everybody and get to know everyone, I've just been blown away by the kindness, by the hospitality, by making me feel like I'm a part of this church and a part of your families, and for all of it. I'm thankful for the work that is poured into this church by so many. It was several dozen people I feel like were up here at the building getting ready for classes tomorrow because of how much they care. I'm thankful for the leadership of the elders, the vision, the direction, the care and concern with which they lead in the likeness of Christ. For all of it, I'm just immensely grateful to be here. And I'm thankful for your patience through my floundering and my trying to be trained, I guess. Lawrence is doing his best. But all of that to say thank you, and to say that, sometimes when it's like a thank you, you're like, are you about to leave or something? I hope I'm not leaving. Sometimes people will ask, like, hey, so what's your, it's been about a couple years, I don't know if y'all are trying to shove me out the door or what, but you're just like, what's next, I guess. And the plan, I guess, for now is to, like, maybe I could say it this way. I am fully 100% committed to pouring everything I have here to Lost River, to this church family, to use all the ways that you've poured into me to just try as best I can to just give that back. While I'm not in the, I guess, training program anymore, I've shaken off the oppressive yoke of bondage of Lawrence Kelly. I can finally tell him no. I don't have to go get his coffee and park his car. While I'm not in the training program, I'm still being trained by every one of you. Every time I listen to a Lawrence Kelly sermon, it's still going to impact me the same way. I'm going to think, wow, if this is what people are getting every week, well, now I guess not every week. I'm sorry, I'm the problem. What an amazing group, and I'm so thankful to be a part of it. I know that took up a fair amount of time, but I wanted to say thank you, and that I'm 100% committed to being a part of this group and pouring what I can. I want to start, I started and now I'm starting again. Last week, I'll start off with the Lawrence Kelly quote. Last week, the last point in the lesson really resonated with me, and particularly the way that something was worded. And the last point was this, that as we think about how to build our life on the foundation of Christ, one of the things that we have to do is to counter the climate of perpetual anxiety with a healthy cadence of weekly rituals or routines or rhythms. And I love that idea of like a climate. No matter where you are, no matter where you find yourself, we all exist within a kind of cultural climate, an atmosphere that we're all just kind of breathing in. And it often goes undetected, just like you can't see the air that you're breathing in, unless it's like really, really bad. But you can't see the air that you're breathing in, and yet we live in this cultural climate where what we're breathing in deeply shapes and forms who we are. It shapes our worldview, what we think of as right and true and good and attractive and purposeful and important. It shapes what we think of as the blessed life, this kind of cultural climate. And the climate right now, one of those is anxiety. But there's an interesting quote by a guy named Ronald Reisenhower, something like that. He wrote a book that has to do with some of these things. And he says this, that Western culture today is so powerful and alluring that it often swallows us whole. Its beauty, its power and promise generally take away our breath, and he says our perspective. The lure of present salvation, money, sex, creativity, the good life had for the most part entertained, amused, and I'm having trouble reading it actually, and numbed us into a state where we no longer have a perspective beyond that of our culture and its short-range soteriology. And that last word, soteriology, is just a fancy way of saying like doctrine of salvation. Every culture has an idea of what saves you, of what makes for a life that is worth living. And so much of culture is so short-range. It's all of these things. And the culture has a way, it's interesting, I like how it's worded, it takes our breath away, and it also takes away our perspective. We don't see the same way that we did before. it shapes what we think and feel and how we live. And maybe this isn't the perfect analogy, but it reminds me, I was watching a movie a while back called Chernobyl, and many of you are probably aware about the events surrounding Chernobyl, but it's about a man who goes in and there's another potential reactor that could be set off, and he has to kind of go in on mission to wade through the radioactive murk that's all around to make sure that something even more cataclysmic wouldn't happen, that something worse wouldn't occur. And so he goes in and he has a big suit on, and he's doing his mission stuff, saving the planet. And one of the things that he has is this really eerily looking, scary looking shaped mask. And the purpose is, of course, so that he doesn't breathe in the toxic air that's all around them. And the idea is that to exist in that environment, to accomplish what he needs to in that environment, then he has to breathe a different air. And I think that's a great image for us, and this idea of a climate that's all around us, an atmosphere that's all around us. And maybe that sounds kind of negative, but isn't it true that a lot of the atmosphere of our culture is toxic, that it is soul destroying, that it's soul deforming. And what we need is, in our cultural climate of anxiety or despair or whatever else it might be, what we need if we want to thrive in our current cultural climate is to breathe a different air. We have to counter the formation of the world with a healthy cadence of yearly, monthly, weekly, and daily rhythms that allow us to take in the breath of heaven. Or in the words of the Apostle Paul, I love how he puts this. He says, "Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind." And this is so powerful. Paul says every one of us, every person is undergoing spiritual formation. Every person is undergoing soul formation. Whether you are a religious person or not, we're all undergoing this kind of formation deep within us. Our minds and imaginations are constantly being shaped and molded by various soul-shaping influences. And the question that I want to ask this morning is, what soul-shaping influences are you allowing to form you? What soul-shaping influences are you allowing to form you and your family and your kids and the people that are around you? What is the soul-shaping influence that forms you? And maybe I'll just add this before we move on. Maybe it sounds negative that there's this radioactive decay all around us, and that's the idea of the culture, and we need to breathe a different air because we're just better or something like that. That's not the case. If our soul is going to thrive, we need the breath of heaven. We need the life that God breathed into us in the very beginning, in the garden. We need that life again. And the good news is that just as Jesus breathed it out again on his apostles, so he breathes it out on us. And so we as people, as families, as a church, can create an entirely different atmosphere and become, in almost a literal way, a breath of fresh air. And so how do we do that? What soul-shaping influences are you allowing to form you? And to help us think about that, I want us to turn to the book of Psalms and go right to Psalm 1. The Psalms were the ultimate way of formation for the Hebrew people. They didn't have TV, they didn't have media, they didn't have games on their phone, they didn't have YouTube or things like that. What serviced their entertainment and music and narrative and art were the Psalms. And the Psalms weren't really an end of themselves. The Psalms were the poetic and musical expression of the law of the Lord, of especially the first 5 books of the Bible. And this songbook wasn't thrown together overnight. It actually came together over the course of about 1,000 years. One of the earliest, probably being one that is attributed to Moses. But then it's passed down generation after generation until it's all compiled together, in which it comes in this 5-volume set sometime during or after the exile in Babylon. And from that point on, the Psalter became the heart and soul of Hebrew culture. So much so that they would literally, all of them, would memorize all 150 Psalms, to where if you just said the first line, the very first line of a psalm, they would be able to recite it to you and recall it by heart. And we may have more to say about that in a moment, but the point here at the beginning is this. In the midst of Babylon, in the midst of all these cultures that were wanting to shape and form and fashion them in the likeness of their image and the likeness of the prevailing spirit of the age, of the gods of their people, what they held on to, what was the central formative instrument in the life of the Hebrew people, was this, the book of the Psalms. And here's how it all begins. What's interesting about the Psalms is they weave very similar themes all throughout. They're not disconnected and disjointed. The themes are laid out right at the beginning, and here's how Psalm 1 begins. Blessed is the one. Blessed is the one. Every culture, every people has a different way of answering or of finishing that sentence. Blessed is the one who finds themselves at the top of their career. Blessed is the one who follows this 12-step program to personal success or health or fitness. Blessed is the one who has the most followers on Instagram. Blessed is the one who marries the ideal person and has that dream home and has the perfect kids. Everybody has a way of describing that, of finishing that sentence. Blessed is the one who fill in the blank. And what's interesting is that the book of Psalms starts out by saying what the blessed life is not. It says, blessed is the one who walks not in the counsel of the wicked, nor stands in the way of sinners, nor sits in the seat of the scoffers. So the blessed life is found not in walking or standing or sitting among the influences that are shaping us toward evil, that are shaping us toward dehumanizing perspectives of ourselves and other people. And there's this progression that I think is so true experientially. You notice this, I guess we should say, digression of walking, standing, and sitting. And that's how soul-shaping influences seem to work, right? First, we're walking along, then we stand and we pause and we converse and we take counsel with, and eventually we find ourselves planted, rooted among these soul-shaping influences that are deforming our humanity. And we probably all know to some degree what that's like. But Psalm 1 starts out with this warning: don't conform to the soul-shaping influences of the culture around you. But instead, the blessed one is the one who his delight is in the law of the Lord. And on his law, he meditates day and night. And this is pretty interesting. It's an interesting approach to this question about what makes for the blessed life, to delight in the law of the Lord. And at first that might seem even counterintuitive, like the law is something that is oppressive and burdensome and restricting. And it's the very kind of thing that runs a lot of non-church people, a lot of unbelievers away from the church, right? Or maybe even people who are at one time were believers, it runs them away from the church because it's just about rule keeping. And so how is it that we delight in the law of the Lord? How do we make sense of all of this? And maybe we could start with this. Why do we have laws to begin with? Maybe there's several reasons to keep us from killing each other, to have just penalties, to have penalties that don't go beyond appropriate attributive justice. But for a large part, the reason why we have laws is because it's sort of an agreed upon method, an agreed upon standard about what makes for human flourishing. We think this is what, if we can function by these set of laws, then this will best promote the well-being of me and my family and all the people who are part of this community or state or country. And so, unfortunately, some of the laws that we have might be arbitrary or perhaps even unfair, right? No nation is perfect, but what if there really was a divine law? What if there really was a law that's handed down from on high, a designer's manual about how to fully embrace what it means to be human? If we had something like that, wouldn't that be worth delighting in? That we have something where we don't have to guess about what makes for a life well lived. We don't have to go just upon the standards and the norms and the winds of doctrine of the culture around us that are trying to shape us, but that we have something that's certain and sure, that's the design of the Creator handed down from us on high, that we can know this is what it means to be human. This is what it means to live, to live a life that is blessed. And so this is what the law of the Lord is. This is what we can delight in, but more than that, we not only delight in it because of a law that helps us understand what it means to be human, but it also helps us to understand the nature of the lawgiver. And that's perhaps even more fundamental, that within these words are revealed the nature and the character of our God. And so this is why the Bible is so beautiful and so important. This is why it's vital that we open it up, that we look into it, that we have these weekly rhythms, these rituals on a yearly, monthly, weekly, daily basis where we're taking it in, because it's not just an arbitrary set of rules, but it is defining the nature of God and therein revealing what it means to be partakers of the divine nature. That as we come to know Him, we come to know who we are and who He desires for us to become, and His love and goodwill. And so it's not just that we delight in it, but He also says that we meditate on it, that we meditate on the law of the Lord day and night. And maybe in our culture, meditation is often associated with kind of like Eastern meditation, perhaps the emptying of our minds to become more presently aware of ourselves. And maybe there's some value to that. Maybe that can be an important thing. But biblical meditation, Jewish meditation, is something that's quite different. Biblical meditation is not about emptying your mind and becoming more aware of yourself, but it's filling your mind and becoming more aware of the presence of God. And there's a really good example of how this works in Hebrew culture. every day and night for thousands of years, the Hebrew people would say the same prayer over and over again. It's called the Shema. Listen, that's what it was. That's what it would be in English. And it says, "Hear, O Israel," Deuteronomy 6 and verse 4, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. And you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind and with all your strength. And I inserted the way that Jesus quotes it, the way that I believe it's the Septuagint that this is found in, but heart, soul, mind, strength. You notice that this incorporates every aspect of our being, our intellect, our emotions, our affections, our will, all surrendered to loving and being loved by the Creator God. And that's like a really cool thing that they did. That every day and night, it was this prayer that was on their hearts and on their minds that they would say out loud as a family over and over again. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. But this morning, I want us to imagine, what if you did that? What if your family, what if you got together with people and you meditated on something like that? That the first thought when you wake up in the morning and the last thought before going to sleep at night was this. And they didn't just do this every morning and evening, but it goes on in verse 6 to say this, "And these words, this Shema, this prayer that I commend to you today shall be on your heart. And you shall teach them diligently to your children. You shall talk of them when you sit in your house and when you walk by them in the way, and when you lie down and when you rise. And you shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be as frontlets between your eyes. You shall write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates." And the idea is that everywhere you go, everywhere you look, is an opportunity to meditate on loving and being loved by God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength. So we wake up, and the first thing that we do is we check our phones, and we maybe watch the news while we eat. And then we get in our cars and we turn Spotify on and we start playing music or the radio or whatever. And during lunchtime, we're on some sports app or social media or watching some YouTube video. And we come home at the end of the day and we have the TV on while we eat and after we eat. And by the end of the day, it's like we feel like we don't even have time to take in God's word, much less to meditate on it or to have it delight our soul. And I know that might be like stepping on toes. I feel like I'm kind of stepping on my own toes with that statement. But imagine if you actually chose a kind of life, a rhythm of your life, these yearly, monthly, weekly rituals that allowed you to take in the breath of heaven, that allowed you to take in the life of God that's revealed within these words. What would that be like? And the psalmist gives us an analogy. He says, the person who delights in and meditates on the law of the Lord, he is like a tree. It's like a tree that's planted by streams of water that yields fruit in its season. Its leaf doesn't wither. In all that he does, he prospers. But the wicked are not so. The wicked are like chaff that the wind drives away. And I love these two contrasting images here. I've never seen, we talked about bread this morning, the process of making bread. I've never seen chaff like blown in the wind, but I was driving down 165 and off to my right in one of the fields, I saw this like plastic bag. I really think it must have been 100 plus feet in the air. I have no idea how it got there, but it's just like whirling around in the wind. And it's tossed and it's just like barreling over and blown every which way. And it's like sometimes that's about how life feels. Sometimes we feel like we are chaff that's just being blown and driven by the wind. And some people choose that. Some people want to live a life that just goes wherever the wind takes them. But other times it just feels like with the cultural pressures that are around us, we feel tossed and turned every which way. We feel anxious and spun around by the winds of life. And it's like Paul talks about in Ephesians 4 in verse 14, that we're just like carried about by every wind of doctrine. As culture turns one way and the next, we just feel like we're being tossed and turned around. But in contrast to the chaff that is just blown away by the wind, the psalmist says that a person who refuses the ever-changing cultural formation of the world and comes to delight in and meditate on the transcendent law of God, they become like a tree. It's not like a Charlie Brown Christmas tree that's like all messed up and frail and brittle and falling apart, but a tree that is stable, a tree that is rooted and planted by streams of water that are resourceful and that provide life and that bears fruit in the world around them, and that no matter what weather comes, the leaf doesn't wither. And it's like, that's the kind of person that we all want to be like. Maybe at times we think we want to be like, just, go where the wind takes you. But the truth is, we want to be the kind of people who are so deeply rooted that nothing can shake us, that no matter what the seasons of life are, no matter what challenges it may bring, that we are evergreen, that our leaf doesn't wither, and that we can bear fruit, that we can bear good works in the lives of the people around us. And the psalmist says the way that happens is if you'll just plant yourself beside the stream. And so finally, the psalm ends with this. Therefore, the wicked will not stand in judgment. So before he said the blessed one is the one who doesn't stand in the counsel of the wicked, and now it's the wicked who will not stand in judgment, nor sinners in the congregation of the righteous. For the Lord knows the way of the righteous, but the way of the wicked will perish. And maybe that sounds harsh. We wonder, why can't everybody be blessed? Why can't God just dump out blessing on everybody and people just go where the wind takes them and it all works out okay? And maybe to answer that question, we could finish with this thought. The wicked won't stand in the judgment. The Lord knows the way of the righteous. The wicked will perish. And the question that raises is back to what we began with. What soul-shaping influences will you allow to form you? And as you think about how you might answer that question, Jesus picks up on this same idea in his famous sermon, the Sermon on the Mount, which, by the way, we're studying in the middle school class right now at the start of this trimester. I'm really excited to be with our 7th and 8th graders. So that there's the shout out. I really am excited about that. But in this Sermon on the Mount, Jesus picks up on these same ideas. He begins his teaching with the word blessed. And he ends this teaching with a similar teaching about the tree and the chaff, about these two foundations of rock and sand, one that stands in the storm and the other that's washed away. But what's most remarkable to me is that when Jesus closes this Sermon on the Mount, he finishes with the similar thought of Psalm 1, that the difference between those two fates is that the wicked will perish because he never knew them. The wicked perish because he never knew them. And what that suggests to us, I think, is this, that Jesus is the stream of life in Psalm 1. He is the law of the Lord. He is the word of God become flesh. He's the divine revelation who shows us how to be fully human and who perfectly shows us the nature of God. And blessed is the one who plants their life next to him. And when we walk away, when we stand in the council of soul-shaping influences other than him, and when we plant ourselves among the seat of influences that are entirely disinterested in his law of love, then we will perish along the way. Without the source of life, then we'll be breathing in the toxic air of the culture around us. And so you don't have to be conformed to this world. You can be transformed by the renewal of your mind. And you don't have to be like the chaff that's tossed by every wind of the culture. You can be like a tree that's planted beside the streams of water, and you don't have to breathe in the toxic air of our cultural climate. You can breathe in the breath of heaven. And your soul can be shaped by delighting in and meditating on the Word of God that is Jesus Christ. And so what soul-shaping influences will you allow to form you in the weeks and months and in this year to come? I hope that you will allow it to be the living water that is Jesus Christ. This morning, it may be that you are feeling perhaps tossed to and fro by the winds of life. And maybe you're seeing that what you do need is a rootedness in a source of life that you're not getting from the outlets that the culture is trying to provide you, that there's something missing, that there's something more. And if that's the case, we would love to talk with you about it. Or if you want to put on Christ in baptism, we would love to help you do that this morning. But however we can help, we hope that you'll make that known to us as together we stand and as we sing.